thank the organizers for inviting me today to express myself from the viewpoint of the public authorities. Thank you, Denis Mollat, for welcoming this first edition of the summit. And this is a historic location of Librairie Mollat, and it's the 120th anniversary of the bookshop. So I know Denis Mollat loves technology. He's a man of tradition, but also a man of technology. And I think it's also very symbolic that this first summit takes place here in Bordeaux in his bookshop. And I would like to talk on behalf of the public authorities. And maybe this is surprising for the Americans here among you. Maybe it's surprising to you to hear the government authorities speak in such a colloquium. Of course, for French people, it's much more common to hear the government on each and every subject. But, you know, I understand that perfectly. And of course, but there are essentially professionals present here today, essentially professionals in publishing. I think all the topics that will be discussed today and tomorrow, issues related to standardization, interoperability, portability of content for books, and also for other cultural industries, if you want to extend this a bit, all of this cannot prosper in Europe if we do not have a political platform, political support, which is quite significant. This is a dimension that I think is fundamental for a project of this type, and I'm going to say a few words about that. So why, the public authorities, why have the public authorities decided to support the EDRLab project in Paris? So it was the Ministry of Culture that I'm representing today, and the National Book Center, which is an agency within the Ministry of Culture, and the French Ministry Ministry of the Economy. So this shows that for the French government, this is a very important matter. And there are two fundamental aspects that the government is focusing on, and I think other European governments are doing that too. So that is why we are supporting the lab. The first aspect is an objective, even if there are not many people here, but we want to respect the reader, respect the consumer. We talk about consumers a lot in publishing, and we don't necessarily meet our clients very often. So the Ministry of Culture is a ministry that in the topics that we defend copyright. The Ministry of Culture is entrusted with copyright issues in France. So what we want to do here is to defend the vision of authors, of writers, of creators, and we defend them more often than we defend the consumer. So this project is an opportunity to talk from the viewpoint of the consumer. And the consumer, to make the consumer want to read digital books, to make the consumer make the move, the transition from the paper book to the digital book, the consumer needs to be able to have access, needs to be able to have a reading experience, which will be similar to what he has with a printed book. And in printed books, well, if I buy my book at the Mollat bookshop, I won't have to read it at Mollat all the time. Of course, Mollat is a beautiful bookshop. I'd like to stay here as long as possible. But I don't want to be, compelled to stay in the bookshop, to stay where I'm located, no matter how nice the bookshop may be, and irrespective of the experience. And in the digital world today, things are organized in such a way that I am linked or connected to that experience, and in a way I'm bound, and it's difficult when I'm a reader to have the same experience as the experience I have with the physical object which has existed for many centuries now, the paper book. So right now that's a problem, and we have focused on this issue from the viewpoint of the consumer. And given that we're the Ministry of Culture, we also focused on the other end of the chain, the authors, the writers. And what does a writer want? If a writer has a book published in digital format, what does that writer want? He wants to have a form of security. He doesn't want his content to be disseminated all over the place, throughout the digital world. I don't want to speak in the place of the authors instead of them, but an author wants his book to be available digitally in the broadest possible context, and not only on a given intermediary or vendor site, for example, which would then in a way almost kidnap the consumer. So, in addition to that mediation, we want to have a direct relationship with the consumer. So that's what the author wants. The author wants to be in contact with the person actually reading his book. So for security issues, well, we have to have protection measures. So these protection measures must be favorable, must be in favor of the experience of the consumer. And today that's not really the case. And we also have to ensure that the desire of the author to be read doesn't necessarily depend on intermediaries who would express themselves in the name of the author, but who will not express what the actual desire of the author is. So when we're talking about interoperability standards, we bring together two elements which are opposed: the right of access for the consumer, the right that allows the consumer to have access to the content, and the right of the author. And we bring together these issues of copyright with right of access. And I talked about confidence, trust in the digital economy, and this need for security of the writer, of the author, will be asserted because the consumer will know that what he is buying is a sustainable product, as it were, and what he is buying will not disappear in the space of a click, or he won't lose it if he changes his IT equipment. So this is a way of fighting as well, piracy, counterfeiting, infringement. So we are therefore focusing on both of these aspects, protecting the consumer and protecting the author. In addition to these major principles that are part of our action in France and with other European countries as well, we work with many other countries in Europe, there are public policy objectives, and these public policy objectives are twofold. So the first is a diversity objective in publishing, in production. So diversity in publishing also means diversity in distribution channels. If distribution channels are concentrated, well, there is a risk, there's a threat to diversity of creative production. So this objective of competition is an objective that we are pursuing, and we are fighting a number of phenomena which could lead to monopolies or excessive concentration of the activity, which are based on vertical technological silos. Now, of course, this is not an easy objective to demonstrate. These technological silos are two-faced, and so they have two sides to them. So they'll say that a technological monopoly can help businesses to invest in technologies, and so technological monopolies are factors of innovation. But others will say that these will also be, in a way, like annuities to ensure revenue, and this is a way to keep an acquired position without innovating. So they're two sides to the story, and the government is focusing on the fact that this is a bad use of monopolies. So our objective, as I said, is diversity and competition. And that's what we've worked on with our fixed price policy. Librairie Mollat, this bookshop, is an excellent example of the success of the public policy. The second objective that we are pursuing is an objective, a service objective, a vision to serve very specific audiences as well. French policy right now is working a lot, but this is the same thing at the European level. There are many initiatives throughout Europe on this issue, and two types of audiences which are very significant. And these two audiences are disabled users. The development of technological standards for our disabled fellow citizens. This is a promise to be able to read better in the same way as everybody. So, and the other important audience, target audience that we have, is our fellow citizens who actually go to libraries. In France, we have a very significant network of libraries, and book policy in France, like in many other countries, is a regulation policy for the economic sector, but also a policy to favor easy access, because for some of our more disadvantaged citizens, it is important to have a very significant, very developed library network in France, in the United States, in other European countries. Libraries, of course, want to be part of this adventure. They want to be able to provide content. They want to be able to deliver content, perhaps not exactly in the same way, but they want to be able to work with these new rules. They want to be able to provide content in the same way as they did before with the physical object, the book. So, we are trying to cater to the needs of our libraries, and standardization, of course, and interoperability issues, of course, at the heart of the response that we want to provide. So our disabled citizens, as we mentioned, so I think there were some discussions about this before I spoke, and there is a form of response that we want to give to make it easier for this sort of audience to have access. So there's an exception to copyright rule. The European Commission, to be able to favor the development of access to a number of uses, cultural or priority access to knowledge, and the European Commission has therefore developed a policy to restrict, to limit copyright, and the Ministry of Culture in France, as I said, is the copyright ministry as well. So it's not something that we like. It seems that in this reform, thanks to the standards ePUB 3 and interoperability makes it possible to have this promise. We are able to solve the equation, and we're able to keep a form of exception, but also favor the inclusion, the integration of our fellow citizens who are disabled, to be able to be part of that audience, to have a native commercial offer outside fair use and copyright. Thanks to technology today, access to books can be provided in the same way for disabled citizens and other citizens. So this favors respect for copyright and policy in favor of our disabled fellow citizens. Now the second aspect, the libraries. Now the European Commission is thinking about exceptions to copyright, because it's not normal that libraries would have to ask for the author's permission to develop and deliver digital books. And in our countries, in particular, well, I'm talking about Europe now, loans of books are made with a system that provides for limitation of copyright. We think that's not necessary, provided that the industry, the authors, are able to provide libraries and readers with a normal reading experience without DRM problems and without locking devices, so that when you go into a library with the reading tool you can have access to files without any problem, that are totally interoperable and that make it possible to have a very good reading experience. So this for us is a spearhead. And so these two different groups that I've identified, the standardization interoperability policy, and to favor stakeholders who work on that beyond the major technological silos I referred to earlier. So that's something we want to do. So you've said, perhaps you're going to say, well, all of this is great, but what are we going to do? You know, of course, the public authorities are great at, stating policy, but how are we actually going to implement that? What policies are we going to implement? And how are we going to work together, coordinate our efforts between professionals and public authorities? So the first point that I would like to emphasize is that even if we're very happy to be in France and we're very happy to be in Bordeaux, this type of policy cannot be implemented only at the national level. And for me, that is why it's important to have the laboratory in France, in Paris. It's a policy that can be expressed at the very least at the European level, of course cross-border, transnational. For us, the right space to think in for this type of policy right now is the European space. So the European authorities have shown interest in these issues. I would like to remind you that this thinking was accelerated in Europe thanks to a report that was published in 2013 by the Bookshop Network, the European Federation of Bookshops, a report on interoperability, standardization formats that was given to the European Commission. The European Commissioner was called Nelly Cruz. She was the European Commissioner at the time in charge of these issues, and she took a strong stand. She spoke in, and it was an article published in The Guardian, and she said the time has come to adopt open standards for digital books, as is already the case for other aspects of the digital economy. Another very interesting example of an action of this type is the multilateral or bilateral action between the different states of the European Union to try to implement coordinated policies from this viewpoint. And we have a good ally. Since 1945, our ally is Germany. Germany is a friendly country, so thank you to my German colleagues who are here today. So with Germany, traditionally we have worked together on policies which are coordinated between our two countries. So on issues, on digital book issues and transition, digital transition, we have worked with German professionals and we have converging views. The German public authorities don't work in the same way as we work in France because it's a federal country, so it's less centralized than we are. But when we do talk to the authorities in each land, we have a great deal of convergence there as well. So in 2014, our Minister of Culture, Mrs. Filipete, worked with her German colleague to move forward together towards standardization and interoperability. And our operational framework today is what the European Commission has given us since Mr. Juncker arrived as the current president, and he developed a digital agenda for the Commission that was last May, and that's a roadmap for the Commission for the entire panel, the entire panorama of digital economy, not only publishing. And quite clearly in there, he said that interoperability, portability, is a policy that we had to focus on because the Commission had adopted this policy in many other sectors. I remember at the beginning of the new millennium, there were directives that were extremely significant that were taken for interoperability, portability of telephone numbers. That's very important for consumers. And in many other sectors, administrative sectors, these issues are addressed. So that is our framework. That's the framework we're working in. So what can we do in that framework? So we can do quite a few things. The framework of the Commission, what does that mean? It means laws, it means directives. And well, over the last few months, there have been quite a few directives that have emerged in European legislation and the administrative work that is done in the different member states. So in these directives in the different sectors, we are working not only as the French government, of course, but foreign governments as well, but also all the professionals involved. Because when the Commission, when laws are decided, there is a platform, there is a government platform, and everyone can express themselves, and professionals can express themselves on these issues. And we in France have worked on major aspects with the professionals in the sector. There is the issue related to copyright. As I said before, today the directive on copyright is open. There's a lot of discussion on that. This is a vector that we think is very interesting. But there's also, and this is a novelty because publishers also agree to work from this viewpoint, there are also all the directives that renovate consumer law in the digital domain. So supply of digital content. And I think that it's relevant to work on these texts concerning consumption with some of the ideas that we would like to develop. And in particular, an idea which is inspired by the way in which we master, we control value, we control prices. So publishers in France, through a law, but in the US through a contractual form, we have preserved the direct relationship with the consumer by circumventing those I will not mention here, but a few very powerful stakeholders in this industry by going around them and restoring a direct link. And I think we really need to work on that. We need to work on reviewing contractual modes that link the reader to the platform and to the publisher. And by reviewing these contractual modes, we've already thought about this quite a lot. We will be able to create two relationships, provision of services relationship that links the consumer to the platform, and a content supply that will link the publisher to the author, and that will be able to create some sort of sustainability, perennity for these contents. And I think this is quite a promising approach, and we want to work on this in the future and encourage other countries to join us around the table to talk about this. And this legislation policy, which is going to address the issues related to contracts, the new contractual forms we're going to have, which will be specific to the digital domain, they can be supported only by a standardization policy, which is very active and which is appropriated, taken by the industry itself. And we'll also need to have, of course, political support for that. And that is support that we want our EU authorities to give as well. We want the EU to be able to implement that support. And that is why we have supported the location and the creation of the lab in Paris. It seemed really essential to us. So from this work, from this laboratory, we hope that we will have very operational proposals. Of course, it has to work. We need solutions. We need these solutions to be implemented by the industry. And we need things gradually to evolve, and I'm very happy to see that many different countries are expressing themselves today, and we have had a lot of discussion with Bill McCoy, and there was an initiative that we worked on in France. We competed with other countries as well, and this is an initiative that allowed Paris to have the lab in France. So it's very fundamental that all the energies of the European states come together. The book policy, the publishing policy is a cultural policy, but it also has to be an industrial policy. And from that viewpoint, Europe has not yet shown everything it can do and everything it can do to help and to support this effort. So the lab, which is working in its offices in Paris, and thanks to this first summit, this first initiative, I hope that this will be an important step, a milestone in this policy. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you very much for talking about French and European policies regarding this. You have also spoken about protection and interoperability. Are there any questions from the floor?
Bonjour Monsieur Georges. J'avais juste une petite question. Vous avez très bien détaillé la politique du gouvernement.
Hello, Mr. Georges. I just wanted to ask a question. You gave a lot of detail regarding the government's policies and regarding these questions. A few days ago, there was the announcement for a competition with Amazon for
self-published
content by young upcoming authors, and I wanted to know how can a public channel be working with Amazon when there is this policy to try and protect? Is this not perhaps a bit of a paradox? Well, thank you for pointing that out to me. I wasn't aware of that, but I do know another one, which is the Ministry of Education with Amazon as well for publishing content, and I can tell you that the editors the publishers who are with us, the Ministry of Culture was an extremely immediate reaction to this, and it is, I do agree with you, it's a real pity on a personal level, but also I think I can say this on behalf of, as a representative of the Ministry of Culture, that the, players, European players, national players, because we have a lot of good professionals in this area, that they are not able to work with industry and the publishing industry, propose projects to the Ministry of Education, to the Ministry of Education, and that And therefore, it's important that there be this transparency and to be open. And we do regret this, and we did express this. So, having said that, indeed today, the Minister of Culture is meeting the Education Minister today. And we generally work and we do these files to prepare these kind of discussions. And this will be linked by Madame Azoulay, and part of this is the fact that we have looked at this partnership that we do not approve of, and it is damaging, we think, and it won't go any further than the few tests that have been divulged by the Ministry for Education. So I will indeed provide this feedback, and I will comment on this that I wasn't aware of. Well, of course, there are. I think that the reason this happened is because they needed funding. I don't think so. I'm not going to discuss it any further because I don't think that's the case. But thank you for the answer to the question, and as soon as possible, very quickly. Thank you very much.